The NBA trade deadline is in the books, and now it's time for some very quick dart reactions. Welcome to Checking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This is technically episode number 194. My earlier episode this week, 193, was with Charlie Cummings, who's at Claytheist11. He had we had a great episode talking about the breakout of Jonathan Kuminga, sort of how that happened, what it says about young wings coming through the draft, what it means for the Warriors moving forward, the choices they're going to have to make, if the current regime is going to be the regime around to make those choices, where Kuminga's game can grow from here, and also talking about Aaron Nesmith, another young wing who sort of belatedly is returning lotto or arguably top 10 value for his team in Indiana, and comparing him to some other, wings in his type who he maybe is subtly a little bit better than. So check that out. That's a more classic chucking darts sort of early development kind of draft lessons sort of episode. But I don't normally do sort of the content churn where I need to be reactionary all the time. It's one of the benefits of just having a podcast that you do as a hobby. But with the trade deadline, I figured I'd do a little something. I tried to get a couple folks on last minute because I hadn't been planning to do a whole lot. But and if I'm able to find the time, then I'll put something out there. I'm gonna have a longer episode next week that is a deeper dive into the deadline with a guest and more about handicapping the title race in wake of the deadline. And that'll be a longer episode, but this is just going to be a couple quick hitters, not really winners, losers, but just sort of stray reactions, having been able to, sleep on it a little bit. So what I think most people talk about this deadline in terms of is number one, the New York Knicks, because of how good they are and because of how you know their market and how aggressively they are covered. So in getting Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic in exchange for, let's see, Quentin Grimes and stray salary Malachi Flynn, Evan Fournier, and 2 second-round picks, for most of what I've seen, the Knicks have been, basically hailed as, the winners of the deadline, or a very shrewd move, and this only makes them deeper and more dangerous in the playoffs. Very complimentary things. I come down on it a little bit differently. I think the deal is fine for New York because they are currently hurt, and they knew that. I think the news about OG kind of came out after this trade happened, which is good work by New York to make sure that that's when it came out. But with him being out at least another 3 weeks, Randall is still working his way back, and there's still a chance that he's going to need surgery. Mitch Robinson is obviously, I think more likely than not gonna, return to a full minutes load this year if he returns at all. And so the Knicks find themselves in a weird position for this season, because that's what this trade is really about, is this season. Yeah, they can guarantee Boyan's salary next year and try to flip him in something else, but they gave up Quentin Grimes, and Grimes, though he's going to be extension eligible, was a member of their rotation, and they got 2 rotation guys back, and they are third in the East, I think, and could very well be second in the East. So this move sort of was their actual deadline move. OG was their main move, but their actual deadline move to see if they could increase their chances in the East just a little bit. I think you have to consider the health factor when discussing all of this, because if OG or Randall are not at 100% come playoff time, then this move is pretty moot. I to me, and for those who are unaware, like, the Detroit Pistons have been very, very bad. And Bojan Bogdanovic was hurt this year, for part of it, but he played in 28 games, and the Pistons in his games went 3-25. I believe Bojan Bogdanovic is 35, 34 years old. Really good shooter, and, can do a little bit off the bounce to get his own shot or to attack a closeout. But this is not he's just not a starting level player for a playoff team. And I think because he's averaging 20 points, there's still maybe a thought that he is that. And the last time he was on a good team, he was starting, and that was in Utah, in a team that also sort of chronically underperformed in the playoffs because they didn't have enough athleticism to really defend people. They left Gobert on an island over and over in those years with Boyan there. That wasn't all Boyan's fault, but he certainly was part of the defensive problem. So if you're imagining what he looks like in a playoff rotation, uh, if Randall and OG are healthy, which is a big if, then Boyan comes off the bench and he will play somewhere between probably 15 and 20 minutes a night, just because Thibodeau is going to ride his starters as hard as he possibly can. And so if Boyan is in that kind of role, I think that is probably okay. I mean, it's not, he would be far from the first sort of aging, bigger wing power forward type to be able to contribute to a team that went deep in the playoffs in that kind of a role. I mean, just look at Kevin Love last year. Like, it can certainly be done. So in that respect, I think it's a fine acquisition. I think that the Burks part of it is a little overstated just because Alec Burks was on the Knicks a couple years ago and they used him as sort of a secondary ball handler, or, in some cases as their primary point guard. That was with him and Derrick Rose when they lost to the Trae Young Hawks. And like the whole point of that experience, not the whole point, but one of the takeaways of the Alec Burks experience in that playoff series is that he is not an actual point guard. Like, it was funny that the Knicks were using him in that capacity because they didn't have anyone else to give the reins to. Now, obviously, he's now a backup because he's not going to start over Dante DiVincenzo. And so he's going to be one of two main guards off the bench between him and Josh Hart. Josh Hart is obviously their extremely important. In my opinion, their most important perimeter bench player, more so than Boyan. But after that, I think a lot of ball handling when Brunson is off the floor might fall to Alec Burks again. And maybe I like Miles McBride. They've given him some run here, and I think he's done pretty well. His shooting has been really hot, but if they are going to rely, if you think about, well, how many minutes is Brunson going to play in the playoffs? And you think, between 30 or maybe around 40, in big games for Thibodeau, if not more, then you would say, okay, Burks is likely a lower minute guy as well. He can play next to Brunson when DiVincenzo sits, so maybe he finds himself again in that 15 to 20 range. I just am a little nervous for the Knicks about what happens when Brunson is off the floor. I don't know that Burks can really patch together all that much for you. And though Burks has played under Thibodeau and I think can still maybe has enough juice left for at least competitiveness on defense for this playoff run, um, I Quentin Grimes is a much better defender. He just is. Now, Burks might be able to replicate or exceed Grimes' scoring because, one of the frustrations that Grimes had with New York and vice versa were how limited his touches were. And, Grimes was basically raised in that New York system to be either shoot or catch and drive. And if you can't finish, and Grimes more often than not would not finish, you know, pass off of your drive and kick, drive and dump off, drive, whatever. Just sort of keep the offense moving. And uh, Burks, there's can be sort of a fallacy of imagining someone's versatility because I think in his career, Burks has been a more versatile offensive player than that. But I don't know how much you really want Burks doing off the dribble, either playing next to Brunson, probably especially next to Brunson, or off the bench. one of the reasons that DiVincenzo has seized that starting spot is because he is such a high volume 3-point shooter and he is such a quick decision maker as a passer that the ball doesn't stick in his hands. And with both Boyan, for what it's worth, and Burks, they have been in a situation in Detroit where it has not mattered how long they really hold the ball, where their seeking of their own offense has not always been a bad choice for the Pistons and might even have been encouraged by the Pistons. And so they're gonna, it's pretty normal, gotta shrink your usage and adapt kind of a thing. But I wouldn't automatically assume that that process is going to go smoothly, number one. And I certainly wouldn't assume that they're going to produce the desired defensive effort and productivity that the Knicks really need for them. Remember, the Knicks are built around Jalen Brunson, built around him, and a little bit around Randall when Randall is healthy. And Jalen Brunson's biggest issue is on the defensive side of the court because he's small. He's competitive, but short wingspan, short stature. Like he's not an impact player at all, and he needs a lot of coverage if he's being hunted on that end, or if he's having trouble getting over screens on that end. And so that means that every other player on the court, every single one is going to have to pull their weight on defense and help pick up the slack. Such is the case when your best player is a small guard. And so if you are excited as a Knicks fan for Boyan and for Burks, I think that's fine. I think that's like you did. This is two rotation players for the price of one. They are beat up. And so, especially in getting to the playoffs, you need the bodies. You don't want, anyone else to get hurt because they're being overplayed. Like, I get it and it's fine. But if you're excited, you have to understand how much is going to be asked of these guys on defense in the playoffs because the Knicks, as everyone has pointed out, have a chance to make the finals. They really do. And so that's a new set of expectations. It is great that they didn't give up anything really beyond Grimes in this trade. That is good. They're keeping their powder dry, whatever, whatever. But there is a real chance that their best chance to win a title with Jalen Brunson is this year, right now. And so why I am a little less rosy on this trade, like I said, I still think it's okay, but I'm a little less rosy on this trade because I have real doubts that Burks and Bogdanovich are ready to contribute at that level, even in 15 to 20 minute a night roles. Every minute counts in the playoffs. Every lineup configuration counts. Every sort of stretch that you're out there and you either have a real deficiency, which I think both of them will on defense, or even uncertainty. If you are still figuring things out on the fly, that can hurt you too. And that really isn't on Bogdanovich and Burks. I mean, that's the nature of making a midseason trade. But since Anunoby and Randall are also hurt, then like a lot is going to have to go right for the Knicks to get where they want to go. Now, the upshot is that Brunson is incredible, and DiVincenzo has played out of his mind and is playing so well. Hartenstein's a great player in Mitch's stead and helps juice their offense a little bit more than Mitch would. Precious is going to play really hard. Hart is going to play really hard. Hart, DiVincenzo, and Brunson obviously love playing together and have a certain chemistry. So they can duct tape it together. And I just think that Burks and Bogdanovich are going to be more valuable in the regular season than they will be in the postseason. And the Knicks' ultimate fate is still about the health of Anunoby and Randall. If Tibbs falls in love again with Burks or with Bogdanovich and starts, ticking up their minutes in the playoffs, I will have issues with that. So just wanted to say that about that deal. Um, I want to talk for a moment about the Philadelphia 76ers. Going to talk more about them next week. But they got Buddy Hield for 3 second-round picks, Marcus Morris and Furkan Korkmaz. Um, I didn't know how to feel about this trade initially, just because I have in my mind pairing Buddy with Maxi in the backcourt and with Embiid, probably not going to be at 100% whenever this all happens. Um, that defensively just doesn't seem tenable. Doesn't seem like the Sixers are going to be able to make the run that they want to make this year. And even if Embiid comes back and stays on the court and is so productive on offense, I still think you're asking too much of like Nick Batum and Covington. I believe Covington's still on their team, and Oubre to cover. The Sixers are likely, you know, Tobias Harris is probably not going to be on their team um, next season. There's a report already that they want to go after Paul George if he's available. So this may not be as much about this season as next. So we'll sort of see where their roster configuration comes out in the summer. But just interesting that they did give up something for Buddy Hield, and he is the best asset in this trade. So I don't really have an issue with it from Philly's perspective in sort of a asset comparison way. But still, if you are acquiring a supporting player, that supporting player still has to fit. And as presently constituted, I don't think that he does. Next week, I'll talk more with my guest about how he might fit on a future version of the Sixers, where it might work a little bit better. But as for now, I think that's still a little fuzzy. Still probably wouldn't start him over DeAnthony Melton. But there's interest there. There's interest for me. All right. So the other I'll touch on the Celtics real quick since we're still in the Eastern Conference because they got Xavier Tillman for a couple seconds. They got Jaden Springer, pardon me, for another second. Clearly, great news that the Celtics have probably hired people off of draft Twitter and still follow that because both of those guys were darlings in their time. Um, Neither is really an offensively viable player. Tillman is a little bit further along than Springer. I mean, Springer hasn't established himself as a rotation player because he can't yet do anything on offense at the NBA level. Though I believe he was either G League MVP or G League Finals MVP, and is still only 21 years old. I mean, I had Jaden Springer as a lottery pick in 2021, so I I loved him too, but has not been able to speed up his release to be able to shoot NBA threes yet. And at 6'4", Springer is kind of, even though he guards up, at that height, you still need to be able to kind of operate a pick and roll, or you need to be an incredible movement shooter like Buddy Hield, high volume, have your own kind of gravity. I mean, that's what you need to be able to do at that height in the NBA offensively, is either run pick and roll or be an insane movement shooter. And Springer is neither. So, he's so young that I think he still could be an asset, but I just don't know that the Celtics really have the minutes to devote to him doing that. Tillman, nice player. Clearly an NBA guy, will remain so for a few years. Undersized, big, but very smart, very tough, very strong. Adept footwork in a variety of different defensive schemes. Um, nice player. Nice player. I again am skeptical that on this Celtics team with their specific personnel, he is going to make a ton of difference. I mean, I think the rosy dream you could have is that when Horford finally moves on and that contract comes off their books, that Tillman becomes a good enough shooter to where he sort of fills the Horford role. Not as well as Horford did it, but that sort of archetype of sort of an undersized center, but who's adept on switches and, can operate in a DHO, just sort of keep up with everyone on both sides of the ball and provide some rebounding. But for now, again, this is the same thing as the Knicks. The Celtics are trying to win a title right now. And that means that these moves have to be seen to an extent through the prism of how much they helped them this year. And it's a pretty open secret that the Celtics issues are going to be on offense in the playoffs down the stretch in games where stuff will start to bog down. That's why Kristaps Porzingis is such a keystone to their title chances, is because when you play five out with him, driving lanes become a little bit easier for the players on the Celtics who are not these playmaking whizzes. And that even extends to Jason Tatum, who I love and have devoted multiple episodes to. Basically, every playoff run, I have a Jason Tatum episode because of how good I think he is and how underappreciated I think he is. But he's not like an incredible playmaker, not an incredible NBA playmaker. No one on that team is. And so when that happens, stuff can devolve into ISO ball or sort of hero ball or just sort of uncertain dribble the air out of the ball kind of offense. And Tillman, because he's not a spacer, is not really going to alleviate that. It does not really provide any sort of meaningful insurance. It's still just going to come down to Porzingis. And so I'd be surprised if Tillman plays much in the playoffs. Again, maybe this pays off more in future seasons as some Horford insurance. Maybe they feel like they can work with Tillman's jumper. Like, I'm not writing the move off, certainly. I just don't think it really moves the needle for this year. Um, Anything else in the East? I don't think so. I'll say okay, we'll go to Dallas here. Or I'll go to OKC first and we'll end with Dallas. So Oklahoma City gets Gordon Hayward for Davis Bertans and Trey Mann and I guess Vasilija Micic. And that's typical great OKC sort of white elephant swapping, working their way up from trading from 12 down to 10 in the draft case and Wallace. They take on the Bertans contract. That's what it cost them. And then they flip Bertans and Trey Mann, who wasn't playing, along with the salary for Gordon Hayward. Uh, really, really good trade. Really good trade. Uh, most people think that the Thunder need another big so that Chet Holmgren can play alongside a more physical guy. Um, I did a preseason episode on the Thunder and sort of their imminent rise with Derek Parker. We talked about this, about where they're going to play Chet. And what Derek said then, which has come out more now in the media since, was that the Oklahoma City Thunder are psychotically committed to having five shooters on the floor at all times, no exceptions. And so for anyone this entire season who's been saying they need to get a big, are they going to be in on Capella or whatever, that they are just talking nonsense. That is not now, nor will it ever be in this iteration of the Thunder, a player that they covet or pay anything to acquire. They are going to go after guys who can maintain the offensive identity that they built, which, by the way, does make sense. Going all in with Chet means that you want to play Chet big minutes in the playoffs. In order to win while doing that, you have to leverage Chet's offensive skill. Leveraging Chet's offensive skill means playing him at the five because that's when he will most frequently have the matchup advantage. Chet's pump and drive game works a lot better against slow footed fives than it does against hyper mobile big wings. So you need him at the five. That's how you outscore the other team, literally. Would it be nice to have uh, another 7-footer as mobile as Chet? Well, sure, but that's not the world we live in. So getting another wing in Hayward, who I heard is close to being able to play again, 6'8", dribble, pass, shoot, it fits right in with everything that they do. So I don't know if I'm at the point where I could say that the Thunder, I know that people are like the Thunder could win the title this year. I haven't said it on the podcast, but I don't really think that that's in the cards just because Chet is still, they are all still so young. But for their age, if they make the finals, it's not the same as winning a championship, but it is like internally, that would be such an accomplishment to do that it is still, it's going to be mostly unprecedented to do with a rookie center in the modern NBA. So that would still be about like an unqualified, incredible success and vindication of everything that they've been building. And with Hayward in the fold, which means that I would think, I mean, they still will play. They're still going to play Giddy, obviously. They're still going to play Aaron Wiggins. They're still going to play Isaiah Joe. But SGA, Jalen Williams, Hayward, Dort, Chet, I mean, that's just going to be very difficult to guard because SGA is so hard to guard. Jalen Williams is so hard to guard one on one. And that's a lot of spacing, and a lot of players are going to be thinking more quickly than the defenders that are on them. And the way to try to beat a team like that means that you're going to need to be able to switch. Because if you are dying on a pick that someone sets for Shea or for Jalen or for Hayward, and you need to start scrambling, the passing and shooting talent on OKC is too much, and they're going to pick you apart. So that means that you're going to have to be able to switch a lot of stuff. And there are teams that can do it. There are teams in the West that are good enough to switch frequently on OKC and kind of make it rough on them. But, your Timberwolves, your Lakers, they don't tend to have the same sort of offensive ceiling. And it like OKC will be matchup dependent in the playoffs, of course, all teams are, but they will have stuff that can work in any matchup. The Clippers maybe pose the biggest threat to them. They are the switchiest team that can still maintain a high offensive ceiling. But apart from that, man, OKC, and if they can get through the West without having to play the Clippers, then OKC is going to have a real shot. A real shot. I think because the Nuggets won last year, the thought is, well, what are you going to do to guard Jokic? And they would. I'll use this to segue into the Mavs, but the way to at least try to guard Jokic is not to put some center on him that is like big. It's not the way to do it because Jokic has played big guys before and he just kills them. Not just because he can outmaneuver them on offense or still kind of bully them on offense, even if they're strong, but it's because big centers tend not to be able to punish Jokic on the other end because they're not good enough shooters. That's the problem. So if you want to try to guard Jokic and really stress the Nuggets, you use a bigger wing to just be strong and make Jokic's post game a little less effective, marginally. You use that big wing to recover out on Jokic when some other action has caused the defense to collapse. You get out there a little bit further. You make the shoot pass decision from three for Jokic just a little bit more difficult. And then you hope on the other end that your offense is lethal enough to do it. And I think low key, OKC is kind of built to do that. Now, would that all come together in year one? Maybe not. But I think their team construction makes a lot of sense. Um, the segue that I'm going to use is that the other team that acquired a wing from the Charlotte Hornets, who would be the one who, in my opinion, could try to guard Jokic in that manner, is PJ Washington. And PJ, uh, this is sort of a microcosm or maybe a different version of the Burks Bogdanovich thing. Like, how valuable are these veteran players in the playoffs if they were just on an awful team? And you can say the same thing about Hayward and PJ Washington. But PJ, PJ is a very interesting player because on the one hand, as an quote unquote archetype, to use the overused word, there's a lot to like about him because he can switch a little bit on defense. He's got length. They've used him at 5 in Charlotte before. and he can shoot. And not just shoot, like he gets shots up. He's not afraid to shoot. Like he can, regardless of his percentages, he's sort of a streaky shooter, but I think he made 7 threes in his first NBA game. I think he made another seven in some game recently, but he can go cold. Uh, he, in terms of volume, will not be shy. I don't expect the Mavericks to use him at 5, obviously, because they also acquired Daniel Gafford. They drafted Derek Lively. And I'll just get both trades out of the way here. Rashawn Holmes and a 2024 late 20s first round pick. That's going to be the worst of OKC and the Clippers. Went to the Wizards for Daniel Gafford. And Grant Williams, which I'll get to, and a top 2 protected 2027 first round pick swap along with Seth Curry, went to the Hornets for PJ Washington, and then 2 seconds, one in 24 and one in 28. So that pick equity is no joke. I mean, there is a lot of value there. And, what it's funny because I think some of the pushback the Mavs have gotten is like, well, now you can't do anything with these picks. Like, how are you gonna help Luka? And look, I have been critical of the Mavs ever since that weird Porzingis trade that felt premature at the deadline rather than doing it over the summer for Spencer Dinwiddie because it felt like they were already preparing to lose Jalen Brunson because that was just them. That was just them acquiring Dinwiddie to replace Brunson when they assumed Brunson was going to be gone because, obviously the move there was just to have taken care of Brunson when you had the chance. But and it's true that in terms of if you're tracking the picks and how many picks they could have now versus how many they do and the way in which they went about it, the Mavs are in the negative. I mean, there's no question about that. They have not managed their assets properly. But once the ball tips, it's not about who has managed their assets properly. It's about who has the best team. And as a team, PJ is a meaningful swing piece, a piece more meaningful than Grant Williams was because Grant, even when Grant is playing well, he is a very one-dimensional offensive player. He sits in the corner and he shoots. Grant was never going to be a movement shooter. Grant's never going to attack anything meaningfully off a closeout. Grant coming into the league was like a post player from Tennessee with great touch, but that's just not a role that any NBA team was going to have him do. And I think it's to his credit that he's carved out a career, gotten himself a second contract, has played meaningfully in the playoffs, and I think could still. But he's the sort of guy I used to call Grant a fifth starter because of his defensive versatility. But the way the league is going, that type of fifth starter is going out of fashion. You just cannot be a perimeter player that is so predictable of an offensive threat. You need to have a little bit more movement, a little bit more dynamism than just sitting in the corner and shooting. PJ does, okay? And with Luke and Kyrie and a lob threat on the floor for 48 minutes between Lively and Gafford, their offense is going to be just fine. But even so, PJ brings another dimension to that. Because even when they went to the Western Conference Finals, the issue with the Mavs was that it was like lots of catch and shoot guys plus Luka and sort of Dinwiddie and Brunson. So PJ can punish a mismatch. PJ can go off the dribble. He can work out of the short roll and be a meaningful player and pick and roll with Luka. And he can shoot, and teams will have to guard him. And so when you look at where this Mavs team could be offensively, you know, offensively, I think they could be if they're not in the top 5 right now, they could be a top 5 offense in the league. They could be a top 3 offense in the league. I mean, they are that good. Gafford, to me, though he has sort of gaudy block numbers, his impact is more felt on the offensive end of the floor than the defensive. And if nothing else, the Mavs should be given credit for number one, tanking those last 2 games and getting Luka on board with tanking them last year to keep their picks so that they could draft Lively, and then acquiring Gafford because Luka and Kyrie it put them with lob catchers. That's what amplifies their passing talent the most is the vertical threat and the vertical spacing. Um, Gafford isn't some amazing rebounder. Lively isn't some amazing rebounder. PJ's a decent rebounder, but rebounding is still going to be, I think, an issue for this team. But they have pretty quietly over the last 12 months gotten a lot bigger while maintaining offensive explosion. And that is always a good recipe to try to turn yourself into a contender, is to just get a little bit bigger at each position while still maintaining a high offensive ceiling, which is what they got. So might Luca ask out and then they're in trouble? Like, yeah, that's what giving up future assets means. It means you're saying there might be a risk down the road, but we think our team is going to be pretty good now. And I got to tell you, man, between Luca, Kyrie, PJ, and Lively, you figure Josh Green is their fifth starter, but Dante Exum and Green, I think, are similar players right now. Exum's still getting healthy. You have Exum and Gafford off the bench. That's a pretty nice little seven-man rotation. Then you still have Derek Jones, who's played a lot for them this year. Jaden Hardy, Maxi Kleber. You can still, and Omax Prosper is their young wing. So you could see, again, even if it's not quite this year, that maybe next year they have a really workable nine-man rotation with depth at guard, wing, and big. I mean, if they especially hit on that Omax Prosper pick. So I I really like it from Dallas's perspective. I think the idea that they're sacrificing all this future versatility, like whenever a really good player comes available, only one team gets them. And because OKC is good and has all this stuff, I think the reaction to other teams giving up future stuff is missing the point that like no one's outbidding OKC anyway. It's just not happening. You're not going to do it. And if the Spurs get on schedule with Wembanyama, you're not going to outbid them either. These firsts that Dallas has are not going to be able to acquire a star. And you're not going to be able to outbid the Knicks in the short term for someone like that anyway. You would just end up being a bridesmaid, which for Mavs fans and free agency is a feeling they're familiar with. So getting a starting wing with real length and strength who could potentially take some tough defensive matchups in the playoffs, I'm all for that. And PJ, again, coming from a bad team, PJ's not used to like busting on defense nonstop every possession and taking all of those matchups. And he's going to need to. That's clear. But between him and Josh Green and Exum, the Mavs have some perimeter guys who can help cover for Luca and Kyrie in a pinch. Like I'm very interested to see this team because I don't know how you guard them with that pick and roll versatility and the shooting that's around Luca and Kyrie. And as far as scoring on them, like, yeah, Gafford is still Gafford is not a center who you can throw at Jokic. This is the example of throwing a big at Jokic. Jokic would still kill him like he kills everyone else. Lively's still young. It likely won't happen this year, but I would expect starting next year, maybe even starting this year, but for sure next year, Dallas will be a top 6 team in the West. They will be a top 6 team. I don't care if the Grizz are healthy. I don't care if the Warriors are healthy. I don't care who the Lakers acquire. I don't care. Starting next year, that's a top 6 team, at least for like the next 2 or 3 years through the end of Luca's deal. And if you're clearly in the top 6, you've got a real shot. That didn't used to be the case in the NBA, but it's the case now. So again, matchup dependent. I think they will need to avoid Denver because the Mavs have committed themselves to playing a big all the time, and I don't think either big would really bother Jokic much. But apart from that, they're going to have a good chance. So I, for one, like what they did. And those are the big things that I wanted to hit on. There's going to be more next week in greater detail about just really looking at title picture in each conference, but wanted to get that out there. Thank y'all very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.